Beatrice lets out a soft, exasperated huff from the stairwell. Betty was dragged into this entirely against her will, in fact, but since it was Subaru's explicit request, it had to be properly answered to, I suppose. Right behind her, Shala's voice chimes in with its usual breezy nonchalance. Master Sama is an absolute, invulnerable man, after all. I wasn't worried for a second. In fact, I was mostly just suspecting the terrifying possibility of little girl number 2 going completely unhinged and exploding the very moment she stood behind Master Sama's back.
Meili stammers, her voice catching in her throat. Watching the two figures slowly ascend the stone steps of the spiral staircase, Meili feels a sudden rush of heat dye her pale cheeks a brilliant crimson. She tries to move her lips to form a defensive retort, but she finds herself entirely at a loss for words. Observing the sheer bewilderment fracturing her composure, Subaru raises a casual hand, calling out a warm greeting to the shadows moving up the stairs. He offers a sigh of relief, thanking them for holding down the rear guard, admitting he is endlessly glad they managed to avoid a fatal plunge into the abyss. Beatrice snorts, elegantly lifting the hem of her dress as she conquers the final few steps. No matter what kind of brave words Subaru may mouth now, there's absolutely no guarantee she would have been forgiven if you had actually come crashing down that staircase. In fact, that is precisely why this outcome is a matter of sheer, ridiculous luck, I suppose.
Behind the Great Spirit, Shaula laboriously trudges back onto the 4th layer, her hands resting lazily behind her head. She had been stationed far down the spiral vertical drops, ready to act as a safety net if the ambush had gone horribly wrong. Meili looks between Beatrice and Shaula, her emerald eyes wide with utter astonishment as she whirls back toward Subaru. What? Oh, Nissan, those two, what in the world is the meaning of this? Subaru crosses his arms over his chest, looking down at the completely oblivious girl with a calm, knowing expression.
He explains that while the execution looked clean, the entire plan was a terrifying gamble, a literal walk along a tightrope. He admits that in his calculations, the darkest pattern, where she successfully pushed his back and sent him plunging to his death, was an incredibly distinct, real possibility. He tells her it only turned out beautifully because he happened to use his reflexes to catch her arms before she could transfer her momentum. Meili bites her lip, gesturing frantically toward the silver-haired half-elf. But Wane-san was also actively keeping a watch over us from the shadows, no? Subaru chuckles, noting that while he is well aware that Amelia-chan possesses an incredible, monstrous physical strength despite her wildly cute appearance, her presence was strictly reserved for an immediate, localized emergency. He dryly adds that it would be an absolute nightmare if she had instinctively jumped down the abyss alongside him in a frantic, reckless effort to save his life. The terrifying truth is, at the very end of the previous timeline, Subaru had physically fallen into the dark tide alongside Amelia. He had wrapped his arms tightly around her body, yet had been entirely powerless to save her from the encroaching shadows. The traumatic memory is etched deeply into the fabric of his soul. If a similar catastrophe were to strike again, his brain tells him he should simply push Amelia toward solid ground, but he knows his broken physique wouldn't have the processing power to handle that data once pushed to its absolute physical limits. Subaru smiles softly, explaining that he deliberately played these extra cards to ensure that precise nightmare never manifested. He judged that having two incredibly powerful entities, Beatrice and Shaula, watching the drop from below would act as the ultimate insurance policy. He had witnessed Beatrice's mastery over spatial magic with his own eyes, and while Shaula's mechanics remained a mystery, her unnatural, monstrous strength was an undeniable fact. He had explicitly tested her strength by forcing her to lift him up while they were mapping out the strategy in the other room. Meili lowers her gaze to the floor, her voice a quiet, shivering whisper. Why would you ever go to such ridiculous lengths for me? There must have been a million simpler, wiser ways to handle a criminal, and yet, the initial embarrassment of having her lethal ambush intercepted begins to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy wave of psychological defeat. Subaru touches a finger to his cheek, offering a sympathetic nod. He concedes that she is entirely right. An easier, far more clinical solution existed to neutralize her threat.
But as he looks into her eyes, his voice hardens with conviction. I think so too. But at the baseline level my mind operates on, an easy path and a pathetic compromise are two sides of the same coin, and wisdom is almost always partnered with an unfair execution. I simply refuse to resort to cheap compromises and unfairness when dealing with a companion. The words hit Meili with a visible impact. Her eyes narrow as she softly bites down on her lower lip, entirely unable to comprehend his moral code.
Subaru offers a strained, slightly weary smile, clenching his fists tightly against his sides. His mind is ruled by a singular, burning desire. He wants to fix this broken world. He desperately wishes to heal every single fractured relationship in this watchtower. And to achieve that miracle, he will leverage every ounce of human effort he can muster. Subaru looks at the group, stating that because he knows his own limitations, he didn't hesitate for a single second to beg Amelia and the others for their help.
Amelia beams, her silver hair catching the light as she maintains her tight, protective embrace around Meili from behind. Resting her chin gently against the girl's petite shoulder, she looks up at Subaru with infinite tenderness. That's exactly right. I was incredibly surprised when Subaru first approached me with the details of this trap, but I could see with a single glance that his heart was dead serious. Besides, Subaru tilts his head. Besides what? I was deeply, profoundly happy that Subaru was actually willing to discuss his burdens with us this time, Amelia whispers, her amethyst eyes shining with absolute sincerity. Because normally, Subaru always makes these secret, frantic preparations to put a violent end to a crisis by the time I even realize a threat exists. A gentle smile touches her lips as she looks up through her lashes. The sight causes Subaru's breath to catch sharply in his throat. Seeing his sudden, stiff embarrassment, Amelia lets out a soft laugh, nodding her head affectionately. She admits it feels a bit strange, but having him approach them to think alongside him felt like a beautiful step forward. Subaru rubs the back of his neck, grumbling to himself that the version of Natsuki Subaru who ruled this tower until yesterday is starting to make him intensely angry. Yet, knowing that hearing this beautiful voice and seeing this radiant face is his exclusive, unique privilege, makes him wonder if his amnesiac state is an oddly deserved punishment. He playfully asks Amelia-chan for her input. Amelia blinks, giving an innocent smile. Sorry, Subaru. I don't understand a single thing you're blathering about. Subaru lets out a helpless laugh, his shoulders relaxing as the tension completely drains from the stone corridor. Beatrice and Shaula finally close the remaining distance, stepping onto the solid floor of the fourth layer to join the circle. Beatrice crosses her short arms, letting out a relieved sigh. Once again, it is an immense relief to know that absolutely nothing happened to your fragile body, in fact. Subaru counters with a smirk, pointing out that nothing happened is a bit of a mechanical understatement, given the absolute psychological reformation that just occurred inside Meili's conscience. Shaula gasps in mock adoration, clapping her hands together as she fawns over his cool aura, loudly proclaiming that even when she has absolutely no idea what he is talking about, his dramatic presentation is entirely unmatched. Subaru dryly asks if she actually holds an ounce of genuine respect for his character. While Shaula has a habit of being unconditionally impressed by any sentence that leaves his mouth, she had been the very first person to enthusiastically endorse his plan when he raised the concept of saving Meili.
It was highly likely she hadn't put a single deep thought into the ethics of the situation, choosing instead to simply support whatever her master desired. Yet that pure, unyielding loyalty was an undeniable comfort to his anxious mind. Meili looks up shyly, her voice small as she targets the Great Spirit. Beatrice-chan, are you not furious with me?
Beatrice fixes her with a stern, icy glare. It is a matter of course that Betty is furious, I suppose, but you look so fragile right now that you'd probably pop to absolute shreds if Betty unleashed her full wrath, so I have somehow managed to forcefully shut it off, in fact. Considering your assistance in the sand dunes outside, what transpired here today shall be officially written off, I suppose. Meili catches her breath, a faint glint of hope rising in her chest, but Beatrice immediately cuts through the relief. However, erasing the slate for today's ambush only applies to this singular incident, in fact. You still bear the absolute, unforgivable sin of burning my beloved forbidden archive to ashes in the previous mansion, I suppose. As long as that historical tragedy exists, Betty will probably never truly forgive your actions, in fact. Amelia lets out a soft, melodic chuckle at the display, leaning in to whisper to the young assassin.
She teases that while Beatrice's words sound incredibly thorny, she explicitly used the word probably, which is her distinct tsundere way of promising to properly forgive Meili if she behaves like a good girl from now on. Beatrice's face flushes a violent crimson as she stomps her foot, screaming for Amelia to stop revealing her internal thoughts. Meili watches the interaction, a soft, vulnerable tone returning to her voice as she murmurs that she will do everything within her power to eventually touch the Great Spirit's heart. Subaru nods rapidly in pure satisfaction. The progress unfolding directly before his eyes is beautiful and real. At the very least, the horrific chain of events where she felt mechanically driven to murder his identity had been completely severed. Though this victory was merely a single drop in the bucket compared to the apocalyptic tragedies scheduled to strike the watchtower, it was a profound step in the right direction. Shala steps up beside him, her dark eyes narrowing as the playful energy leaves her posture. She stares silently at the warm-hearting interaction between Amelia, Beatrice, and the captive girl, before delivering a quiet, uncharacteristically serious question. So, is this truly the path you want to take, Master Sama? Subaru blinks. Shaola looks at him through her lashes, her voice dropping into a calm, chilling frequency. She notes that Meili is a monster who actively attempted to steal his life, asking if it is truly wise to let an assassin walk away with zero physical reproach. Subaru looks back at her, his voice absolute. He explains that Meili has already suffered an immense emotional reproach today, arguing that her violence was born entirely because the adult world had failed to teach her why her actions were inherently evil. He vows that from this exact second onward, they will handle her education together. Shala tilts her head, countering with a pragmatic warning, asking what will happen if his moral lectures fail and she simply attempts to slaughter him again down the line. Subaru shrugs, joking that such a failure would simply mean he is a catastrophic teacher. But he reminds her that he has absolutely no intention of carrying this responsibility alone. He understands that attempting to fundamentally re-engineer the moral architecture of a child trained from infancy to be a lethal weapon is an impossible task for a single human being to shoulder. He doesn't possess that kind of godlike strength. But Subaru has abandoned the isolation of his past lives. He will rely on the unified strength of his companions. He smiles at the voluptuous woman, stating that he explicitly expects her to assist with the child's rehabilitation, warning her that breaking through Meili's obstinate, hardened heart will be a long and grueling road. Shaola freezes, pointing a trembling finger at her own chest in absolute shock. Me too? Of course you too, Subaru declares relaxedly. He notes with a smirk that she possesses a surprisingly natural, teacher-like aura beneath her antics, promising never to leave her out of their family dynamic. He commands her to leverage her overflowing motherhood to melt away the young girl's defenses. Shala stands entirely paralyzed by the declaration, her face turning an intense shade of crimson as her hands wildly fly to her cheeks. She falls into a dramatic, breathless stammer, her voice escalating into a series of emotional gasps. Subaru sweat drops, backing away slightly, as he asks what on earth is wrong with her. "Nothing at all. My mind is entirely made up," Shala screams, her eyes burning with a sudden, chaotic determination, just as Master Sama commands. Meili lets out a defeated, dramatic sigh, puffing out her cheeks as she surrenders to the embrace. She mutters that they are a collection of completely hopeless, absurd people, but commands them to keep the details of this embarrassing staircase ambush an absolute ironclad secret from the rest of the tower. Subaru winces slightly, scratching the back of his head with a nervous, "Ah." Meili's brow furrows instantly, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin.
Amelia steps into the awkward silence, her voice dripping with an apologetic, strained sweetness, as she notes that the secret might be slightly compromised.
Meili's eyes widen in horror. I am suddenly getting an incredibly catastrophic feeling about this. Amelia offers a sheepish smile, delivering the final, crushing blow to her privacy. Subaru had already properly consulted with Ram and the others before we even marched down the stairs. Meili's face twists into an immensely wry, utterly defeated expression. The stone chamber designed for meals and council was officially designated as the common use room, but the moment the 5 companions step across the threshold, they are greeted by the intimidating sight of Ram standing dead center in the room, her hands firmly locked onto her hips. Her light crimson eyes scan their living faces, her voice flat but laced with a rare, peaceful undercurrent. Is that so? It appears you managed to clean up the mess with 0 casualties. Not bad, Barusu. You are actually worthy of a minor compliment. Hearing her high praise fills Subaru with a wave of intense relief. Conquering the crisis with Meili was an achievement he could proudly brag about to the maid without fearing a lethal retaliation. He steps into the room, glad his actions haven't landed him in a legal bind. Echidna scoffs from the corner of the room, her voice dripping with dry amusement as she reveals that Ram had been standing in that exact, rigid posture for hours, anxiously awaiting their safe return.
Ram whips her head around, her eyes narrowing into slits as she snaps that the detail was entirely uncalled for, commanding Echidna to hold her tongue. Echidna simply offers a mysterious, elegant smile, noting that Ram has maintained this exact, fiercely defensive attitude ever since she discovered a different soul was manipulating Anastasia's vocal cords, calling her predictable nature incredibly likable. Sitting gracefully on the stone floor, the witch accepts the maid's silent fury with total composure, before shifting her calculating gaze toward the newcomers. Meili lets out an aggressive instantly averting her face. Echidna raises an eyebrow. So, what exactly is she looking so incredibly sulky about? She points a delicate finger toward the girl, who is currently being carried piggyback style on Shala's shoulders. Meili continues to aggressively pout, burying her face away from the group in a display of pure, unadulterated peevishness. Echidna muses coldly, suggesting that the child is likely throwing a tantrum because her calculated murder plot was systematically intercepted by a bunch of amateurs. She admits that if that is the case, she feels highly uneasy allowing a lethal assassin to roam around their living quarters without ironclad physical constraints. Subaru frantically waves his hands in the air, cutting through the rising tension, insisting that her deduction is entirely wrong. He explains that Meili doesn't harbor active malice anymore. She is simply enduring a massive wave of childlike awkwardness because her hidden thoughts were completely exposed to the entire household. He chuckles, calling her embarrassment incredibly cute. Echidna hums softly, processing the insight. She notes that, given the lethal stakes of her ambush,
Describing her behavior as childlike feels deeply surreal. But she looks at Subaru with a sharp, analytical glint in her eyes, musing that even when a person's memory is entirely wiped clean, their core, true nature, refuses to change so easily. She asks Natsuki-kun if the consistency of his soul is surprising to his own perspective. Subaru offers her a dramatic wink, bowing low as he states that if his amnesia's suffering serves as quality entertainment for her mind, then he considers it an absolute honor.
Ram lets out a sharp, mocking scoff at his theatrics. Subaru ignores the insult, turning his weight in a slow circle to survey the rest of the stone chamber. A sudden realization causes his brow to furrow. He asks where Julius is hiding, wondering if his stomach is acting up again. At a time when the household is navigating the utmost serious affairs of destiny, you choose to engage in such petty, trifling matters. The sheer thought of your behavior is truly vexing.
Subaru distorts his cheeks into a broad smile, turning around to locate the elegant knight standing near the entrance. Julius stands before him, casually adjusting his long bangs with an air of refined superiority. Subaru chuckles, countering that a bathroom emergency is a deeply important task for a human being, refusing to classify it as a trifling matter. Julius looks back at him with a negative, exasperated expression, and Amelia tilts her silver head in genuine concern, asking the knight if his stomach truly hurts.
Julius sighs heavily, imploring Amelia-sama to never take the boy's words at face value. He reminds her that while Subaru is her one and only sworn knight, a position that demands she trust his character more than anyone else, his prominent public statements are often built on a foundation of absolute nonsense. Subaru steps between them, warning Julius to stop stuffing unnecessary propaganda into Amelia Chan's innocent mind. He retorts that since the knight was entirely absent from the crisis meeting, a bathroom excuse is the only face-saving cover he is willing to offer him.
Julius locks eyes with him, his lips slowly loosening into a quiet, breathy laugh. It is an irksome, haughty sound that perfectly matches his handsome appearance. Yet Subaru detects a faint, underlying layer of psychological vacillation hidden beneath the surface. Echidna steps in to clear the air, telling them there is zero need for anxiety. She explains that following their earlier strategic briefing, Julius volunteered to act as an external scout on the upper balconies.
Since Meili possesses the monstrous capability to manipulate wild witch beasts, any real retaliation from her would have manifested as a catastrophic horde attacking the watchtower from the outside desert. Julius nods, confirming that he spent the afternoon monitoring the dunes from the high balcony they discovered the night before. Fortunately, the sands remained completely quiet, and the interior of the tower had settled into a peaceful resolution. He shifts his sharp gaze toward the young girl resting on Shala's back. Meili notices his eyes, instantly souring her expression and twisting her lips in defiance. But seeing her harmless, petulant display causes the tight lines of Julius's face to relax. He admits he is profoundly glad the crisis was resolved safely, confessing that when Subaru originally announced his amnesia, followed by the news of an internal assassin, it felt as if heaven and earth were being violently overturned. Subaru laughs it off, stating that using terms like heaven and earth overturning is a massive dramatic exaggeration, though he dryly concedes that as an amnesiac, he doesn't have much room to lecture anyone on reality. Julius agrees softly, noting that if they had deployed Amelia-sama's full power only to fail the interception, the household would have been cast into a pit of absolute ruin, with zero room for psychological recovery. Subaru raises a single finger, his eyes softening as he looks at his rival. Yeah, I'm incredibly relieved too. It means you and I are still close enough to stand here quarreling like idiots, right? Julius lets out another stuck-up, refined chuckle, but the faint trace of anxiety that had clouded his features earlier completely vanishes. Subaru rests easy, satisfied with the transition.
He processes the reality of his situation. This marks the exact 5th time he has interacted with these people since his awakening in this timeline. Throughout his brief survival, he hasn't been granted a single second of true, unalterated peace. The data shows he has spent far more time dying or panicking than actually bonding with them. Yet the original Natsuki Subaru had forged an unbreakable, beautiful network of connections across this room. A fierce determination hardens in his chest. He will carefully analyze and follow the exact footsteps of his past self, ensuring he never creates a jarring, painful discrepancy that could bring sadness to Amelia and the others. He refuses to force them to confront the terrifying reality that the boy they loved has technically ceased to exist.
It is a dark truth that should remain buried forever. If he can simply mimic the hero they expect, then the true Natsuki Subaru will eventually return to his flesh. Subaru pumps his fist into the air, loudly proclaiming that with their newly reborn, completely friendly team assembled, they should immediately pivot toward conquering the rest of the tower. He asks the room if anyone holds an objection. Amelia pumps her fist in tandem, her eyes sparkling with determination as she promises to give it her absolute all. Beatrice pouts slightly, grumbling that the title "friendly team" carries a distinct, pathetic sense of apathy that insults her status. The rest of the table remains silent, offering a tacit, peaceful agreement that brings a wave of temporary relief to Subaru's mind. Julia steps forward, asking if they can truly assume Meili will remain entirely non-hostile from this moment onward. Subaru assures him the threat has been neutralized, promising that she won't attempt to slide a blade into his throat behind their backs. However, he warns the table that her long-term morality depends entirely on watching their behavior as she grows up under their roof, commanding the warriors to ensure she never witnesses them acting uncool, cowardly, or dreadful.
Julius draws his chin in, a proud smile touching his lips as he tells Subaru to leave the burden of acting as a flawless role model entirely to his expertise. While Subaru doesn't possess a long memory of the knight's accomplishments, he has seen enough data to recognize that Julius embodies an absolute sense of strict self-discipline and mechanical excellence in every single venture. His elegance wasn't just a byproduct of his wealthy, refined upbringing. It was the priceless fruit of continuous, grueling hard work that he actively forced upon his own physique. It was a beautiful, noble trait. Amelia steps closer to Subaru, her amethyst eyes searching his face with deep concern as she softly asks if his brain is feeling healthy enough to continue a serious conversation. Subaru violently jolts, jumping backward with a panicked fluster. Whoa. Amelia blinks, a faint, lonesome sigh escaping her lips as she watches his overreaction. You know, ever since you opened your eyes this morning. No, ever since you confessed to losing your memories, you keep jumping out of your skin every single time I get close to you, Subaru. Is there something inherently strange about my appearance today? Do I have a smudge on my face? Subaru frantically waves his hands, his face burning hot as he stammers that she looks completely flawless, listing off her cute eyes, her cute nose, her cute lips, and her cute ears in a desperate torrent of words. Amelia tilts her head, a soft blush dusting her cheeks. Cute, hee, thank you, but if that's the case, why do you keep running away from me? Subaru covers his face with his hands, desperately looking at her through the small gaps in his fingers. He groans that her facial features aren't just an ordinary collection of parts. They are a divine multiplication of beauty where every single element perfectly complements the next. He laments that her voice is entirely too adorable, her posture is too pure, and she is quite literally a dazzling, holy angel that his mortal eyes cannot look at directly. Beatrice's jaw drops in absolute shock. She stomps her foot on the stone floor, her face burning with embarrassment as she screams into the room. Tilda HK, try delivering your embarrassing confessions in a far more traditional, Subaru-like fashion, I suppose. Subaru blinks in confusion. Wait, what the heck did I do wrong? Beatrice flails her hands.
shouting for him to repeat the sentence about Amelia looking like a holy angel using the original Subaru's distinct, bombastic phrasing. Subaru recoils, whining that her demand is nothing short of a public shaming ritual. He flatly refuses, shouting that it is entirely too embarrassing to mouth out loud. Seeing Beatrice pout, he quickly reaches out to pat her head, assuring her that she is equally cute and angelic in her own unique way, begging her not to sulk. Beatrice lowers her shoulders in total dejection, muttering that while she knows she is a flawless angel, his generic compliment completely misses the structural point of her grievance. Subaru feels a twinge of guilt, keeping his palm anchored to her hair as the group smoothly shifts their weights into a formal, unified circle around the stone table. The atmosphere finally settles into a proper, operational briefing. The true progress of conquering the trials has yet to ignite, but it is time to steer the conversation toward their tactical objectives. Subaru clears his throat, stating that now that Meili is officially an integrated asset of their faction, they should accelerate their efforts to conquer this sandy prison so they can all return to civilization. He asks if the table is ready to march. Ram narrows her light crimson eyes, noting that his fast-paced, authoritative manner of speaking makes her seriously question if his brain is genuinely suffering from amnesia. She adds that while his memory loss is a minor inconvenience compared to the literal monsters guarding the perimeter, it remains a distinct, structural defect that needs to be ironed out. Amelia nods rapidly, stating that a person's identity cannot simply dissolve into the ether without a magical cause, insisting they dedicate themselves to recovering his lost experiences. Subaru raises a flat palm, interjecting a sharp pause into their discussion. About that specific issue. How about we completely disregard my memories for the immediate future? The entire circle freezes, a unified huh, echoing through the chamber as they stare at him in absolute shock. The only individual who doesn't react is Shala, who is currently occupied with playfully braiding Meili's dark blue hair at Subaru's request. Beatrice looks at him with wide, frantic eyes, her voice tight with panic. Subaru, please refuse to make Betty and the others drown in anxiety. In fact, your sudden memory loss was already a terrifying surprise, but standing there claiming it's perfectly fine to abandon your identity is far too self-destructive a path, I suppose. Amelia steps closer, her voice trembling with emotion. Yeah, Beatrice is entirely right, Subaru. Are you spinning this lie because you're terrified of acting as a burden to our expedition? But you literally just approached us to solve the crisis with Meili. In the exact same way, we are going to use our collective minds to solve the mystery of your identity. Please, let us help you. The sheer weight of her selfless devotion causes a sharp pang of guilt to pierce Subaru's heart. He raises a defensive finger, begging them to listen for a single fraction of a second, insisting his choice isn't born out of a pathetic desire for self-abandonment. He claims he possesses a cold, hard piece of logical data behind the strategy. He asks the circle if a single person in this room honestly believes his sudden, violent amnesia is completely disconnected from the mystical architecture of this watchtower. Shala chimes in cheerfully from the back, shouting that Master Sama once smashed his skull against a porcelain urinal in the bathroom and lost his baseline senses for a week, proving his head is naturally prone to accidents. Subaru whips his head around, screaming for the outfielders to shut their mouths for a single second, admitting the data point is terrifying but completely irrelevant to the current brief. Shaking his head, he brings the focus back to the center of the table. He reiterates that a definitive, structural link exists between his memory loss and the mechanics of their current trial. Echidna's analytical brain processes the variable instantly. Her eyes widen slightly as she finishes his thought. In other words, you believe that upon fulfilling the baseline cosmic conditions required to fully conquer this tower, the magical mechanism behind your amnesia will automatically invert, naturally returning your identity to your flesh. Is that your hypothesis, Natsuki-kun? Subaru nods aggressively, pointing a finger at her in pure appreciation, confirming she has read his mind flawlessly. Julius rests his hand against his chin, his eyes darkening with contemplation as he weighs the theory. He muses that if the tower's internal defense mechanisms actively targeted Subaru's soul, crossing the finish line of the trial will inevitably bring them face to face with the cure. Alternatively, he suggests a far more dangerous concept. The amnesia might have triggered precisely because the original Subaru got entirely too close to an absolute, forbidden truth. Echidna nods in agreement, stating the pattern is highly probable. She analyzes his past performance inside the Library of Tegeta, pointing out that his strategic insights and deductions utilized a foreign framework of knowledge that no living person in their world could possibly possess. She hypothesizes that because Natsuki-kun pushed his intellect far ahead of their collective progress, the tower's security system reacted by wiping his hard drive. Subaru frantically waves his hands in front of his face, shouting that her calculation is an absolute, terrifying overestimation of his value. He dryly protests that he is nothing more than an ordinary, antisocial shut-in whose only real specialized skills involve neatly spreading bedsheets and handling delicate sewing work. Emilia's eyes light up. She reaches out, her fingers gently tracing the intricate, colorful embroidery stitched into the fabric of her traveling clothes. Ah, look, Subaru, the cute embroidery on these garments, your past self crafted this by hand. Does looking at the patterns spark a single memory inside your mind? It's incredibly cute, right? It's Puck. Subaru squints at the design, analyzing the stitched image of a small, cute cat. He lets out a disappointed sigh, admitting that while the craftsmanship is excellent, the silhouette triggers absolutely zero recognition in his brain. Seeing her face fall into a downhearted expression sends a sharp pang through his chest. He deduces that the cat must have been a beloved pet she left behind before marching into the desert. A quiet vow forms in his mind. He will conquer this hellhole as fast as possible so she can safely return home and reunite with her animal. Ram crosses her arms, letting out a sharp sigh. So Barusu managed to stumble across a forbidden piece of data he had zero business learning, and his own rash, unguided curiosity resulted in his soul being wiped clean? Yes, the description fits his idiotic character perfectly. Beatrice lowers her head, her voice tight. Ram's phrasing carries its usual, uncalled-for thorns, but Betty is forced to logically agree with her conclusion, in fact. Furthermore, Subaru's strategic choice to prioritize the absolute conquest of the watchtower over his own health. The prospect is deeply repulsive to my heart, but it does carry a cold, pragmatic point, I suppose. Subaru looks down at her softly. Beatrice. He understands that her deep dissatisfaction is born entirely out of pure love. She loathes the concept of putting his personal salvation on the back burner. The realization that a creature this beautiful cares so intensely for his well-being fills his soul with a profound wave of warmth. But Subaru cannot afford to alter his focus. If they waste precious days wandering aimlessly through the corridors, searching for a magical cure for his amnesia, they will completely fail to intercept the catastrophic tragedies scheduled to butcher the household. He knows what lies ahead. He remembers the blood, the severing of limbs, and the screams. To survive the oncoming storm, Subaru and his companions must operate as a single, lethal, and hyper-focused machine. Subaru looks around the circle, his voice absolute as he begs them to accept his terms. He clarifies that he doesn't view his amnesia as a minor joke, but insists his personal defects can be treated later. If they allow localized problems to delay their grand campaign, they will ensure their ultimate failure. He commands them to focus exclusively on their primary objective. His earnest, unfiltered appeal leaves the seasoned warriors entirely at a loss for words. Ram looks around the table, her light crimson eyes reflecting a mixture of deep irritation and reluctant acceptance as she lets out a heavy, deflated sigh. Truly, you are an absolute, unmitigated fool, she mutters. She argues that even after having his brain entirely wiped clean, his deplorable, reckless intellect refuses to alter its patterns. She dryly reasons that since an amnesiac Barusu contributes practically zero tactical value to their current operational planning, dedicating their limited hours to recovering his useless memories would be a massive waste of resources. She commands the room to conquer the trial first, stating they can anticipate his recovery after the danger has been neutralized. Subaru pouts, grumbling that her wording could use a bit of standard human politeness. Ram scoffs, countering that since he managed to lose his identity as a direct consequence of attacking the trial, it is only fair that he goes back to the scene of the crime to claw them back. She tells him to stop causing her unnecessary problems. Subaru locks eyes with her, a silent understanding passing between them. He had delivered an absolute vow to her by the well, promising to remember her sister, Rem, even if he had to physically die to trigger the reset. He knows her harsh words are merely a protective shell to hide the immense strain carved into her heart by his choice to delay the cure. Yet, precisely because she trusts the weight of his blood vow, she is willing to back his strategy today. She is trusting a man notorious for breaking his word. Echidna breaks the silence, noting from a clinical perspective that since they currently possess 0 actionable spells to artificially restore a fractured soul, aligning with Natsuki-kun and Ram's methodology is the only logical path forward. She optimistically suggests that a natural cognitive recovery might occur over time through simple environmental exposure. Julius steps forward, offering a passive, reluctant agreement. He states that while he will not allocate primary resources toward the amnesia, he will immediately pivot his focus if a clean opportunity manifests during their run. He looks toward the 2 distraught girls, noting softly that he refuses to allow Emilia-sama and Beatrice-sama to endure such a heartbreaking, sad expression for long. Subaru offers a deep, grateful nod to the knight and the witch. He turns his dark eyes back toward the center of the table, waiting for the final verdict from his core anchors. Emilia and Beatrice hesitate for a few heavy, agonizing seconds before the half-elf lets out a soft sigh of surrender. This single time, even if the weight is incredibly tough on my heart, I will force myself to be patient, Subaru, Emilia whispers, her eyes locking onto his. But, you must grant me a single condition. Subaru blinks, what condition? Sometimes, you must excuse me when I inevitably choose to worry about your life above everything else in this world, she demands softly. Subaru's breath hitches. He lowers his head in a quiet, humbled apology, realizing her condition is the exact emotional equivalent of what he had just demanded from them. Beatrice lets out a sad, heavy sigh from his side, crossing her arms as she tells him that Emilia just stole the exact speech she was preparing to deliver. She warns him that her words were designed to be the ultimate psychological deterrent, commanding him to thoroughly reflect on his reckless nature. Subaru smiles gently, patting her head once more. Yeah, I hear you, I got it. With the absolute, unified approval of the entire watchtower secured, Natsuki Subaru forces his resolve to harden into steel. The team is operational, the trust is restored, and the slate is clean. He steps forward to the center of the stone table, ready to pitch their very first tactical maneuver of the new loop. All right then. How about we all march down together and launch a systematic search to see if Reed Estria's Book of the Dead is hidden inside the Library of Tegeta?